inspiring some sort of insight within patients as a way of helping them to overcome whatever mental disorders they might be facing, whether chronic depression or social anxiety or generalized anxiety or whatnot. So what I want to talk to you about today is a model that I formulated myself, and I call it metacognitive autocorrection therapy. Now, before we get there, and that's going to be at the end, we need to first operationalize what is meant by insight. So we have to make the notion of insight more scientifically tractable, so that we have an understanding of like how it happens, how we can facilitate it. Second, we're going to discuss how insight is relevant to psychotherapy. Now, the phenomenologists, they had an important realization, and the realization was that the world that we experience isn't a world filled with objects, but a world filled with meaning, okay, with different meanings. Now, let's just take any object, and I've chosen a stick, okay? Now, you see a stick, but, for an old man who, needs support, the stick can be used as a cane, okay? For an instructor, it can be used as a pointer. For the martial artist, it's a weapon. And for someone who's camping out in the woods, it's a source of fuel or fire. So in all four instances, the object is the same. It's the exact same stick. Imagine that it's identical, okay? But what changes, what's different, is its meaning. And along with this change in meaning follows a change in its use, okay? So what we can take away from this is four things: that objects can bear different meanings, and you could shift from seeing it as bearing one meaning to another, right? The stick, in one situation, I can see it as a weapon, in another as a cane or a pointer. The second thing is that what we experience is we experience an object as the meaning which it is bearing. So it's not that I'm seeing a cane, I'm seeing an object as a cane. I'm seeing the stick as a cane. I project that meaning onto it. Third, well, we learn these meanings from our experiences. And what we learn tends to help us guide ourselves and our actions in the future. So we've got this top-down kind of guidance of meaning. Meaning helps us to guide ourselves from the top down. But this isn't always the case. So just a show of hands, who's familiar with the Stroop effect? So for those of you who aren't, the task is this. On the right, you see a bunch of words that are written in, the font is written in a different color than what the word is, right? So green is written in blue, red and yellow, etc., etc. The point is to try to read all those, so name the color the word is written in without reading the word, okay? And what most people, and in fact all people, typically tend to experience is a top-down interference. Because what happens here is there's two dimensions of meaning, okay? The first is the meaning of the colors, aka the font, right? And the second is the meaning of the text, the words, so there's a textual meaning. And what happens is a top-down interference of the textual meaning, right, which is highly automatized. You end up reading the word before you even try to read it, okay? And that interferes with the task, which is to zero in and kind of pay more attention to the color of the words and not what the words actually say. So there is a way to overcome this kind of top-down interference, and this is an example of that. This is known as the bus problem. So again, show of hands who's familiar with this. So just to give you, great. So don't ruin it for the rest of them, okay? The task is to determine in which direction the bus is moving. Now, it's either right or left. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds to think about it, and if anybody comes up with an answer, please let us know. Okay, so I presume no answer, unless anybody? Nobody? Okay. Yes?
The door is on the other side.
There you go. Actually, that's the answer. That's the insight that we have. So what most of you were probably thinking was, well, I see, wheels, I see the frame of the bus, I see windows, and it seems to be perfectly symmetrical. So I therefore conclude that there's no way of determining, the answer, the solution to the problem. Now, the problem is in the way you were framing the problem, okay? And the way you framed it was by paying attention to what you saw, to the information that was apparent. Instead, what you were supposed to do is pay attention to what's missing in the picture, and that's the door. Because every bus has a door, right? I mean, how else would anybody get in or out of it? So once you realize that, you go like, ah, the door must be on the other side of the bus, because I am supposedly looking at a bus, okay? And once you realize that, the solution is right there. The bus must be going in the left direction. Unless you're in the UK, you know, Japan, Australia, whatever. So that's exactly what we mean by insight, okay? An insight happens when you suddenly shift from one framing of a problem, which was actually, more appropriately put, a misframing of the problem, to a kind of framing that allows you or enables you to actually resolve it, okay? So William James had a really cool thing to say about this kind of top-down phenomenon, okay? And you know, he lived from 1842 to 1910. He was an American philosopher, psychologist, and to some even a proto-cognitive scientist. And he said the following: so we plunge forward into the field of fresh experience with the beliefs that our ancestors and we have made already. These determine what we notice. What we notice determines what we do. What we do again determines what we experience, and so on from one thing to another. Now, this is really cool because it, you know, explains a few really important, crucial things about the kind of top-down guidance that, you know, we get from meaning. So it says that, you know, what we learn, the meanings that we learn, they constrain our attention, okay? Because we can't pay attention to everything at the same time. That's combinatorially explosive. That's impossible. Instead, they help us to zero in on certain features or aspects of experience to make sense of what's going on in a very narrow kind of tunnel vision-y way. So, you know, this implies that, by the same virtue, that meaning constrains our action. Because when I'm seeing the stick as a cane, that's going to mean that, you know, I'm going to use it as a cane, or that I know that I can use it as a cane. What I can't use it as is, you know, something to save the world with, or to fly into space. That's just not part of the meaning. I can't interpret it in that way. That won't make sense. So, meaning constrains attention. It constrains action, right? And his model also suggests that the subject, the agent, is dynamically engaged with experience, with environment. In other words, you know, what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing right now is going to determine what I do. So I move over here right now, and where I've moved is going to further close up certain possibilities and open up new ones. So there's this kind of enabling, selective constraining happening. However, there's a problem with James's model of learning. Although it's able to explain these three really crucial things, what it doesn't explain is our capacity for self-correction. So it explains, you know, the top-down meaning, like the stick example, for example, or the Stroop effect, a kind of top-down interference, but it doesn't explain how we correct ourselves, okay? So if we were to draw this out, we have this kind of diagram. In the center is the I made a pun, which is the subject, okay? And to the right of this, and then there's knowledge, aka the meanings, and the object of experience, okay? According to James, our knowledge, right, our meanings, they bias our attention from the top down to help us to interpret our experience in a certain way, to help us to act in certain ways, okay? Once our attention becomes biased, as does our interpretation, we end up relying on rote problem-solving strategies. So if I see the stick and I register it as, oh, in fact, let me just ask you, did you guys see the blue and black dress, white and gold dress phenomenon? Okay. Now, some people either see it as blue and black, right, and others see it as white or gold. And this is an ambiguous figure. There's two ways of interpreting it. This is important. So what happens is when you interpret something in a certain way, you can only act based on what you think it is, what you think the experience really means to you. Okay? And this essentially causes a confirmation bias, where, you know, I'm seeing the stick as a cane, and by using it as a cane and knowing that I can use it as a cane, that confirms my bias if the stick is a cane. Okay? What happens then when we're facing a problem where we bear the wrong knowledge? Okay, it's irrelevant. This is going to cause us to notice the wrong things, which is going to cause us to do the wrong things, act in the wrong ways, and that's going to feed back on itself. Okay, in psychology, this is known as functional fixedness, or that's one of the terms used for it, and it's a kind of vicious circularity that's caused by the interpretation of our own making. Okay. And I've decided to call it semiotic biasing because, well, semiosis is a term used to describe the production of meaning, and what's happening here is a top-down interference of meaning. Okay, so let's see how insight happens, how insight is acquired. The first thing, well, this is, I guess, my own research at this point. The meanings. If the meanings are to get inhibited, okay, if you stop paying attention to the world top down, based on what you know, okay, and pay attention to it bottom up in an unbiased manner, then this is going to cause you to, or allow you to notice, or to reinterpret your experience in new ways, okay? By not letting your meanings to bias your attention, you're able to increase and broaden your scope of attention, which will allow you to notice new things, okay? Now, this may as well allow you to, realize a novel problem-solving strategy. And once this happens, you experience a correction in your knowledge, okay? And this is exactly what I think we mean by insight, the acquisition of insight. It's a kind of self-correction of semiotic biasing that happens when you shift from paying attention to the world in a top-down way, biased by your meanings, to a bottom-up kind of way, unbiased, by your knowledge. So, if you pay attention to the shape of the diagram, it resembles the self-eating serpent, the Ouroboros. Okay, I won't tell you what the Ouroboros really is about. There's a lot of mythology in it, but that's why I've decided to call this the Ouroboros learning mechanism. Okay, now this is important because now we have at hand a very powerful way of explaining some phenomena. Okay. What William James couldn't explain with his. He presupposed self-correction, but he couldn't explain it, and that's exactly what we've done. So, part of the Ouroboros learning mechanism is, again, there's a top-down mode of attention guided by prior knowledge and meanings, okay? And there's a bottom-up mode of attention not guided by prior knowledge and meanings. It accounts for semiotic biasing as a top-down interference of previously acquired meanings, and it also accounts and explains and operationalizes the acquisition of insight as the bottom-up correction of semiotic biasing. Okay? Now, how is this related to psychotherapy? So, here's the argument I want to give to you. I want to say that at least some mental disorders are cases of semiotic biasing, a perpetuated misframing, right, of a situation where the patient's own cognition is getting in its own way of solving the problem at hand. And there might be other things involved, but I'll stick to this for now. So, if semiotic biasing can be overcome via the acquisition of insight, then some mental disorders can also be overcome via the acquisition of insight. So, semiotic biasing can be overcome via the acquisition of insight. This is what I tried to show you, at least, with the Ouroboros learning mechanism. Therefore, some mental disorders can also be overcome via the acquisition of insight. Now, how can we do this? First thing I want to say is that there's a way of optimizing the OLM, the Ouroboros learning mechanism. Once I show you how I think that can be done, we'll move on to understand what I meant by metacognitive autocorrection therapy. So, optimizing the OLM. So, what we need to do is find a way of facilitating the acquisition of insight when needed. In other words, when semiotic biasing does occur, okay? And the way to do that, I think, is through mindfulness meditation, which is a skill, and I'll get more into that. The second, we want to try to reduce the general rate of semiotic biasing, because, biasing, it's going to occur no matter what, okay? We're fallible human beings. Our knowledge is going to be fallible. It's always going to be prone to the possibility of falsity, okay? So, that means we can minimize, but not completely reduce, the rate of semiotic biasing. And we're going to do that through the cultivation of epistemic virtues. Now, I'm a philosopher, so this really matters to me. So first, mindfulness meditation. What is mindfulness? The definition I want to offer to you is that mindfulness is the meta-attentive ability to regulate one's own attention. So in other words, by taking a step back, okay, and paying attention to the way I'm paying attention to the world, I can figure out ways of regulating and redirecting, guiding my own attention through my intentions, okay? So it's an intentional way of meta-attentively regulating your own attention. In short, sorry about that. So the argument I want to give is this. If mindfulness is a meta-attentive ability to regulate one's own attention, okay, and if the acquisition of insight occurs when the subject shifts from the top-down mode of attention to the bottom-up, okay, then it should mean that the cultivation of mindfulness should facilitate the acquisition of insight. Because, okay, once more, okay? So if mindfulness is the meta-attentive ability to regulate one's own attention, to guide it according to how you want it, and if the acquisition of insight occurs when the subject shifts from the top-down mode of attention, remember that, to the bottom-up, then that should mean that cultivating mindfulness should improve your attentional regulation and should help you to facilitate the acquisition of insight when needed. Now, this is a plausibility argument, and I'm pretty sure you need more empirical stuff that, since I'm a philosopher, and I'll stay away from that for now. Let's see what people have said about mindfulness, okay? So, in 2005, Shapiro has stated that mindful behavior has shown to make people better learners, okay? Now, if you take my argument into account, then if being mindful helps to self-correct via the acquisition of insight, then that should confirm this, right? That you will become a better learner. You'll self-correct and go on quicker. Siegel in 2007 has argued that mindfulness practitioners are able to free themselves from top-down prisons of prior learning and habit. And of course, this confirms the entire meta-attentional regulation statement that I put forth. Now, Allen et al. Have showed that in 2012 that mindfulness practitioners experience significantly less Stroop interference than their mindless counterparts. Again, goes to confirm what I've been trying to argue. Now, Dreyfus, he has, this was his definition of mindfulness. Again, it goes to confirm the meta-intentional kind of character of mindfulness as the meta-attentive ability to monitor one's mental states. Okay? So, second, epistemic virtues. What is an epistemic virtue? So, episteme means knowledge in Greek, and virtue is, I guess, excellence is a good way of understanding virtue. So, someone who's virtuous is someone who's excellent, who's able to excel in certain tasks. Okay? So, what I want to offer you as a definition is any practice or set of practices that will help to reduce the general rate of biasing in knowledge should count as an epistemic virtue. Now, an example would be active open-mindedness, keeping your mind open to potentially new, relevant information as a way of countering the sampling bias. Okay? Intellectual honesty, so accepting openly new evidence that might not necessarily cohere with your beliefs, whatever you hold to be true. Okay? And this has to, I guess, be accompanied by a sense of humility, academic humility. Parsimony, Occam's razor. Make the least number of assumptions as possible. That's, the general rule. And why is that? Because the less assumptions you make, the smaller the likelihood that you'll be wrong. Again, and logical reasoning, which is, pretty much about being critical of the truth. There's two types of logical reasoning: deductive reasoning, okay, like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's a deductively valid argument. There's 100% preservation of the truth. The premises necessitate the conclusion, okay? Now, inductive reasoning, on the other hand, it's probabilistic. Generalizations are an example of inductive reasoning. For example, the premise that all men are mortal that's an a priori kind of analytic premise, but the only way that you will know for sure that all men are mortal is if you go out there and test every single human being for his or her mortality. Okay? An inductively cogent argument is an argument that's highly plausible, that's highly convincing. It's a good argument that's inductive. So I want to say that optimizing the OLM, in conclusion, would have to do with cultivating mindfulness, which would help to facilitate the acquisition of insight, okay, when needed, and cultivating epistemic virtues to help to reduce the general rate of biasing whenever it does occur. And it is the dual cultivation of mindfulness and epistemic virtues that helps to optimize the Ouroboros learning mechanism. So, what I want to offer, or what I want to propose, is that in psychotherapy, instead of just inspiring the acquisition of insight as a way of helping the patient to overcome his psychopathogenic problem, you could actually teach or guide the patient through this dual cultivation of mindfulness and epistemic virtues to eventually transform the patient to become his or her own therapist. Okay, so it's a long-term kind of therapy. So by doing this, the client will acquire the metacognitive tools that are presupposed in mindfulness and epistemic virtues that will allow for self-correction and self-regulation to take place in a better, more improved manner. Now, which is why I've called this metacognitive autocorrection therapy. You give the patient, the tools he or she needs in order to work on his or her problems, by herself. Now, there's a saying, if you give a man a fish, then you fed him for a day. But if you teach him how to fish, then you fed him for a lifetime. And this is what this model is modeled after. So, client eventually transforms into your own therapist, and this is how I think insight is relevant to psychotherapy. Thank you very much. Questions or 2 minutes? Okay, 2 minutes for questions. Yes.
It sort of sounds like too much depends on the client's self-knowledge or ability to regulate not only his thoughts but his preconditioning, his habits, and so on. So I'm thinking of going back to the first part of your talk, reducing the let me see, how did we put it? The bottom-up process. I'm thinking of what a shaman does, which is to obliterate the normal perspective of the person, and make changes in another state of consciousness, so that the cognitive habits don't get in the way at all.
Right. So your question being?
Yeah, what's up with that?
All right, way to cut to it. What's up with that, Jack?
I like what you're saying when you bring in the cognitive autocorrection therapy. There's an aspect of determining what defines the witness. And in order to have a mindfulness meditation, I'm a mindfulness meditator myself, a long-term 10, 20-year Buddhist practitioner myself. But in the process of being with that metacognitive state of being able to assess one's behavior in relationship to other people, that can be a real tricky, and to get to a place where you can actually define and structure some idea of what the witness is. Because the mindfulness meditation is stepping out of everything that we are in this world. It's being able to go to the place of observer versus and against the observed. You know, it's a
Right.
place of going totally out of witness.
Right.
So in order to bring out this kind of therapy, someone has to be very, very advanced. They have to be able to reassess and re-acknowledge and reassociate everything from, in a sense, redefine the whole definition of
Right.
self.
So, two things I want to say to that. Okay. First is that mindfulness is not just a meditative practice; it's also a contemplative practice.
That's right.
There should be a way of grounding yourself in a sturdy kind of worldview foundation, so that you don't end up.
Yeah,
You know,
you need both.
Right, you
You
need both.
need to be both up there and here. I mean, but the reality is we all come back to here. This is where we live.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So the thing is that there's another aspect of it, because mindfulness is essentially a skill, right? It's a procedural act. By practicing more and more, you become better at it. So your cognitive flexibility improves. Okay, by that virtue, your cognitive leaping also increases. So your ability to again understand things more quickly, to make better sense of things, that also improves and becomes more efficient and faster. So what I was trying to emphasize on, or put an emphasis on, is that aspect of mindfulness, of the improvement of cognition itself.
Yeah, and the
Cognitive
cognitive
flexibility.
behavior is often biologically defined, and sometimes we cannot control it, period. It's just,
That's true.
all
So
the
again,
brain
some
and
mental
everything.
disorders and not all, right? But yes, that's it. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.